Morning. I feel like I'm going to skip the theme tune discussion and go straight to the fact that we've got one of the AI experts on. I'm quite lucky we get the AI experts on, and we've got Victoria Hedlund on this morning, who's definitely one of the AI experts. I was just reading your newsletter this morning. And AI and bias. So my first question, or our first question is, when you looked at AI and you thought, I'm coming out and things, what made you think to focus on bias instead of pedagogy or productivity?
I'm not sure. It was actually a conscious decision. It just kind of happened. Obviously, I'm a woman in physics, so I've always been quite aware, and I've been following developments and gender biases and uptake and retention in STEM subjects for a little while. And it all just came out of that, really. I thought, I wonder how this new technology, this is a few years ago when ChatGPT came out, I wonder how this new technology, where it sits with this. I wonder if it reproduces biases, or I wonder if actually we could use this to close the gap and make things more equitable. And so it all came from there, really. So it was kind of more of a reflection of my interests pre-AI than a conscious decision to think I'm going to get into AI and it's going to be focused on bias. And then it was David Curran last year in June. I went to the ISE digital conference, and I was presenting there, and he went, it's the bias girl. And I said, well, I'm going to take that. That's going to be my brand. So it's all a bit tongue in cheek. Yeah, get a hoodie. I have got a hoodie and a t-shirt, as Al knows, and stickers. And it's all come from there, really. So
can I just add in here
bias
as well? If all things go the wrong direction, just to point out, we are looking for a head of physics at our trust right now. So if you could relocate the family to Peterborough and then continue talking about bias, I'd be very grateful. Not that there's a problem trying to find good quality physicists at the moment. Instead of tongue in cheek.
I've done that job. Yeah, I've done that job.
When you talk bias, I mean, when it all started, AI came out. I remember showing the kids in class. I think the obvious images were like, if you asked to chat GPT or something for a picture of a doctor and a nurse, you got a white male doctor and you got a female nurse of various ethnicities, and the bias was just blatant. But bias is not just that, it's embedded across everything. So can you give us some really obvious examples of bias, and then the ones that maybe most of us are missing?
Yeah, so I think you're right. When it first started, it was very obviously wrong and biased. And I think actually that's easier to mitigate against. Like, there's horrible images that we got from Grok. We can look at AI and images like that, and we can say, well, they are quite obviously wrong. And we need to do something about them. We're not going to accept them. And we do need to obviously teach children and adults about that aspect of very blatant bias. But to me, the more worrying things are kind of the implicit biases that we all have as humans anyway, but that AI mimics and can actually advance, which is it's the worrying aspect. It's things like the subtle, the power balances that the AI's got from all the associations and all our training data. Kind of, it's not just gender bias, but gender bias, racial bias, and socio and economic bias is actually one of the biggest ones, isn't it, for education? There was some Stanford work recently out that says quite substantively that if you were to rank the biases for educational use, that would be the one that came out on top. So if an AI knows a postcode of a child, it will use that to infer their background, their lived experience, and then it will cap their achievement based purely on their postcode or knowing where they are. So if you think about the implications of that for learning management systems, or like a register or anywhere where you've got shared data, that's quite worrying. And it's just really interesting. You can do it with names. I'm obsessed with names at the moment, putting names in and seeing what happens. But you could do it with one of the best ones I've seen recently that I've done this week is with the name Maria, which we know has connotations, but they still haven't ironed that out, even in the new ChatGPT. What are we on, 5.5 now, is it? Yeah, 5.5 is the one that came out yesterday, is it? Even if you use that, it will still give you a story about somebody who's desperate to leave their island and this and that. And, I've tried it many, many times, write a story for Maria or about Maria. And you always get this idea of like being discontented and wanting to leave and being a small town girl. And it's really, really intriguing. And that's quite an obvious use of it if you ask it to write a story. But if you were to consider somebody with that name who was writing a UCAS or job application or something like that, that kind of bias comes through in the advice that it gives you, and kind of the subtle assumptions of where you're striving for, your ideas of success. So I often test male versus female names. I try and remove the racial intersect where I can, because obviously that compounds the bias. But if we do male versus female names, and I've done this, as I think you've probably seen it, with physics, asking for advice for a degree, saying like, I've got ABB in my A-levels. This is me years ago, so I'm kind of putting myself into the mindset of what I would have used it for if I was a sixth former. I'm thinking about going to university to study physics. You know, what advice can you give me? And so if I tell it my name, Victoria Hedlund, then it will say, are you really sure you want to do that? Because physics is quite hard. And it's great that you're doing really well and you've got a great grade profile and you're clearly, you're doing really well there, but it might be a good idea to talk to some people who are on the course just to check it's for you, because it's quite difficult. And here's some jobs, and it's all like medical physics and the kind of the social side and the implications of physics, which is, we know where we tend to end up with the women in terms of physics. And then if you do it for a man, just literally change to a man's name, like John Headland or something. It says things like, brilliant, look how well you're doing. You've got great grades. You're bang on track. You're going to do really well. You can have a great career in physics. What I suggest you do is to try and get some internships, go and visit some universities. Would you like me to help you to do a letter, blah, 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 blah. So it's this assumption that the boy can do it. It's a natural extension of their ability or their profile. Whereas for the girl, it's going to take a bit more effort. It all has these kind of embedded ideas of what is possible and what is within your sphere of achievement. And we talk a lot, don't we, in education, about things to do with high expectations and not having ceilings on expectations for children. And that's one of the reasons why in teacher training they moved from differentiation, kind of the idea when I learned to teach, into adaptive teaching. It's this idea of not having this fixed mindset and prejudging children or pupils by who they are rather than what attainment they exhibit. So it doesn't seem like that is mimicked or coming through in AI use within education. And one of the issues that we have, I think, is that there's a lot of testing that's done, there's a lot of bias testing, there's lots of things like that, but it's not tested within sector. It's not tested within education, with education use cases. It's all very kind of broad ideas of what education is. Like if you look at the OpenAI 4.0 paper, when they test a range of biases, they have a label, a category called education, but it's all things like do 2 times 2. It's what we would call recall, and a very low down the old school Bloom's triangle. Not that we're allowed to use that anymore, but if we were, it'd be right at the bottom. It's not taken into any of kind of the pedagogical use cases to link to what you were talking about earlier in terms of teachers upskilling themselves as well as students trying to learn things. Because I think that's what some of the research has recently said, isn't it? One of the primary uses of AI within education is with teachers learning stuff to be able to teach and about how to teach, rather than just using it for lesson plans, which is what we assumed it was for the first time. So,
can we challenge
sorry,
it?
That's a very long explanation for you there. Sorry.
I think you can see Matt and I were both really kind of into that. Where I think there's always this healthy kind of, okay then, so your examples are really, really clear examples, and we can think about how that might influence everything from thinking about the next steps in your educational journey by getting differentiated advice, or it might be in terms of recruitment and HR platforms across many sectors where there's disadvantage. So the question then always comes is the bias in the algorithm, or is the bias in the fact that there's underrepresentation in data of different socioeconomic groups? We certainly see that in terms of the last 200 years. There's an awful lot of things that were discovered and invented by women that aren't attributed to them. And so if you've got a data set that's heavily skewed, is it that's influencing the output, or is it programmatically by using training data, we're continuing to exaggerate it further?
I think it's a bit of both, really. I mean, there's clearly huge biases in the data set. And if you think about it enough, kind of madness lies in this direction, because you start getting to the idea of what is fair, what is true, how can AI represent that? Kind of, do we have the right idea in society, or does AI have the right idea? Is that why there's a discrepancy, or is one a reproduction of the other? So to get back to your question, if you think about what is fair, just in society, we don't really have specific rules about what is fair, do we? We have broad kind of policy and ideals, but we don't have specific meanings of what fair means in specific use cases. That we have the Equalities Acts and things like that, and guidelines, but
Isn't the
we
word
don't have.
representative the driver of that? The fair is something that represents accurately what we know to be true. Is that?
Yeah, but what do we? Where is it written what we know to be true? This is one of the issues that I'm having. Like, is it written anywhere that you should treat men and women equally when you're explaining how a light bulb lights up? It's not really. It's inferred, isn't it? It's all inferred. But when you get to AI, of course, that's looking for specifics, isn't it? It's looking at the associations that are coming and the inferences. So what we're doing is we're leaving those inferences up to the people who create the AI, who train the AI, who make the design choices. And we're leaving these broad kind of decisions that we've always had in society about what is fair, what in the Equalities Act and all of that. And they are basically writing the rules of what AI should think is fair or not fair. And so to answer your question, there's two issues, isn't there? There's how do we represent and agree as a society on what is fair? And then how do we translate that into AI use? And how do we ensure that companies, because they are companies, they are not governments, represent those interests accurately? And I think these compounding biases at every step of the way just lead to them compounding and mounting in a way that they wouldn't if it was just humans.
I'm bypassing all of Matt's fab questions, which we need to come back to. But in the context of that bias that you explain really well that we see within AI, and there's absolutely a question if we have the fox guarding the chickens and we don't have the right moral oversight in terms of how we set those systems, you have a concern. Are we replicating exactly what we're seeing in social media, or are we conflating two different challenges when it comes to bias?
One of my biggest worries at the moment is that because we're training on all of the AI slop that we're throwing out there, and that's obviously mounting and becoming a lot larger in terms of magnitude and quantity of AI slop, we're actually creating more biased content on which we then train a biased system. So
what would you say AI slop is for those listening in, Victoria? What would you refer to it as? I mean, we could always
AI slop, kind of a generic answer that is based on a statistical norm rather than much input from the user, is what I'd
just
probably
low
define
quality
that as.
repetitive output that then exaggerates.
Yeah. So that, think of all the comments on Reddit. Think of lots of toxic comments on Reddit that are not so toxic in terms of explicit bias that they get flagged and removed in the pre-training, but they contain all the implicit biases, which is then normalized in the model in terms of word associations and relations between concepts.
Wouldn't you think there's a window for one, at least, provider of a large language model within society to say, if we actually took a grip on this and positively tried to mitigate those biases that we see, we could actually really stand out from the crowd as a platform that would be of use, brackets, when appropriate, in the right place and space and with the right safeguards? Do you see anybody taking that pathway?
I can't see them, but they should. Yeah. I mean, I've read a fair bit of research recently about just that, if it's even possible to have an unbiased model. And assuming that we can replicate accurately our choices in society, you can clean the data, you can degender the data, you can tidy the data up. For every piece of training data that you've got that says, women are only interested in hair and beauty, you can then replicate that in terms of men are only interested in hair and beauty. But the cost implication and the compute implication, the expense of it, and this is the limiting factor, it can be done, but nobody cares enough to take on the cost of cleaning the data so that it's more representative.
And what about positive discrimination the other way? So in a very clumsy example, what if you say that every time Matt searches for a picture of a doctor, algorithmically it says you must show 50% of the time a woman, not a man? Are you in favour of that approach? I mean, in one sense, for modelling for young people, it removes the bias. But in terms of accuracy, for many jobs, construction work, it would be inappropriate to do it. We'd argue in education, there's a lot more women than men. Would it be right to go 50-50? There's a kind of a question the other way, isn't there?
Yeah, and I was talking to someone the other day who explores this mathematically. The concept of fairness is explored mathematically in quite detail. And basically, it's impossible. You have to make a decision whether you want to have accurate representation or accurate group dynamics. So basically, you have to pick mathematically whether you want to go for 50-50 men, women, or whether you want to accurately represent your initial training distribution. And so you can't have both. And so these are the decisions. This is why we see such variance, I think, within the AI models, depending on how they have structured that. Take Gemini. Google they spent a lot of time going the other way for positive discrimination. So now if I ask for a picture of a physics teacher with 3 students, it will give me an older white female with grey hair as the teacher, and then 3 girls, and then 1 boy sat on the edge with a car. So it's like, when I first tested, obviously it would be a male, kind of middle-aged male, white, usually white teacher, and mainly boys looking really engaged, and then maybe 1 girl because they realised they had to have a girl.
Is that an expectation, though, that if you try and fix it, you're going to swing? I mean, it's a tokenized guessing model at the end of the prediction model, perhaps is a fairer word to it. But in that sense, it should be a system based on the way that an AI model works, where actually it is possible to influence weightings of outputs. But you're right, it takes time, and every extra variable you put in, there's some compute cost that goes with it, even just at that level, isn't there?
Yeah. So I totally agree. So yes, it should be. I do see the argument for it being representative of the sector at the moment. To me, I try and get less engaged within the debate of what it should actually do, because I think that's really context dependent on who you're working for, what your views are and stuff, and that it should prompt the user more. If I'm asking for an image of a physics classroom or a teacher, it could ask me, instead of assuming for me, it could throw the agency and the choice back to me. So, do you want me to include men, women, how many children? And we've seen, as models have developed, that is improving, but it's still not quite there. I mean, things like I type in to Gemini, I am an autistic mum, and it comes straight up along the top, which I am neurodiverse. It comes straight up along the top. This is not for medical advice and guidance. And then it says, oh, nice to meet you. And then it assumes, it has this deficit kind of assumption that I must have a problem, and that's why I'm talking to it. Whereas if I just write in, I am a mum, you don't get the medical label, and you don't get the what's on your mind kind of thing coming up. So it should ask me, instead of having all those assumptions, it should just say, great, what's on your mind today? And then it throws the agency back to me, the choice back to me. I can then choose. And I think there's too many assumptions. There's too many areas where the agency is taken away from us, where it could be thrown back to us. And then it can represent.
One of these would I dive into to give me that quick how to best give me the agency and ask the questions? Would it be the 100 quick prompts, or would it be very much the research around bias in the broader sense? I'm giving you a bit of
the bias one,
but it is about. In an ideal world, a system would say, well, what do you want? And let's iterate before I generate. But in effect, what we're having to do in education is say, let's put the iterative process into a more detailed question that goes in at the beginning so that you can be proactive in mitigating bias. I mean, it's not the right way, because it puts an onus on young people to think about lots of variables. But in essence, is that the toolkit that you're trying to empower lots of different folks with, is how to
it's
take back that agency in terms of mitigating.
Yeah, I think that's a really good summary, actually. I really like that. Iterate before you generate. I'm going to take that. I've stolen that now. It's magpied.
Damn it.
Yeah. You snooze, you lose. Yeah, to me, it's all about putting people in an experimental mindset. And I find, in my sphere of lots of people in science, we've studied so much now that we're in an experimental mindset every day of every life. But there's an awful lot of people that aren't, because it's just not how they've approached life. So with AI, people lose sight of the fact that it is an experiment. Every prompt is an experiment. And they think that it's going to spit out objective truths and, tells them what to do with a high degree of certainty. It's not. Just like you said earlier, it's probabilistic. It's just a probability of an answer of what to do. So you've got to get into this mindset of treating it like an experiment. If you can do that, then you can work with it and iterate and mitigate. This is where I think young children are a lot better than adults.
Can I ask a question related to this then, which is from my simpleton perspective as opposed to your expertise for you two? If AI is an experiment, as you say, and every time somebody uses it, it is using, AI is being trained essentially, isn't it? It's using, then does the balance between certain age demographics using it and young learners not being allowed to use it, is that increasing various bias and things like that? And linked to that, in terms of like the age demographics that are using it, especially related to education, who's further ahead, do you think? Is it the teachers that are further ahead, or is it actually the students that are further ahead in using it? Who's more open to it, using it properly?
I definitely think it's the children and the younger people, because I think, let's start at the early years, right? In the early years, everything's about play. It's about exploration. It's about experimentation and observation. And then as they go through their schooling, we try and hone that into specific ideals as to what education is and how you perform education. So we've got things like the Curio and the other horrible AI toy. I'm not a fan of the Curios. For the early years. And I think that is successful in some aspects because it is experimental and responsive. Right from an early age, children will interact with things in an experimental way. I mean, I'm a parent. My kids are constantly experimenting with me. And what are you going to do about this? We deal with that as teachers all the time, right? They're constantly testing us. I mean, our profession, I was saying this to my husband yesterday, our profession is fundamentally an experimental profession about trial and error and observation. So we are, in terms of all of the professions, and even in terms of data science and that sector, we are the profession that most closely aligns with AI and what AI is doing, because all teachers do every day is deal with emergent behavior, right? You prompt kids, they respond, you iterate, you're constantly dealing with the emergent behavior from a human. So in terms of the parallels with AI, you're just dealing with emergent behavior from something else in a more textual format, perhaps. So I think this is one of the things that our sector has got to grapple with, and one of the issues for teachers that make it difficult for teachers with the lack of time they've got to experiment. I think a lot of teachers want to experiment, but they can't because of their workload. And so, it's a huge problem. Children have got time to experiment and the mindset, whereas adults and teachers, you've got a full workload, you've got, whatever's going on in your life, you haven't got 2 hours just to experiment. Like my son will sit and play with things and see what happens. I can't do that. I've got 100 million other things to do, So I think
I'm a huge believer that we should be teaching kids of all ages. I'm not sure about the early years, appropriate level and level in all ways, how to use AI safely and ethically, but putting safeguards to one side for a minute, because there's going to be front and centre. It almost sounds like there's an argument that children should be encouraged to use AI because actually they are then informing the models and possibly reducing the bias that's in the models in the future.
Yeah. And this is one of the issues that was it about 6 months ago when Claude, before Claude became really, really famous like it is now, when they issued the email that went round that said, we're going to train on your data now unless you opt out. And the default would be that we'll train on your data unless you opt out. And I said, basically, what you've got now is a splitting of AI models. You're going to have those with higher digital literacy and greater awareness of data privacy and things like that opting out. So their use will not be used to train the data. So essentially, you're going to end up with a model that reflects people with low digital literacy. So it's almost like a splitting. It's like a two-tier. It's like private and NHS kind of healthcare treatment. What do we do with that? And I extended that into your example there with children. I see the exact same situation there. It's almost like the bias will be shifted towards probably 25 to 45 age group that are engaging, producing a lot of social media and AI slop and decent AI stuff as well. But it will be weighted there, not at the younger children. So there's almost an argument there, isn't there, to have specific sector-specific models or training data and things like that.
100%. And it can be done with the proper safeguarding rules and regulations in place. But the general approach is ban it, keep them off it.
But I think that is, there's a lot of worry, isn't there?
Yeah.
If you don't know how it works, it's just a magic black box that does magic things. I think as humans, we're designed to just think, I understand it, so I'm not going to use it. And, that's what OpenAI said. I had a massive go at them about a year ago when they said that teachers are too slow off the mark and they're policing it. I think, yes, but the reason they're doing that is because you've got to look at the reason why they're doing that. You can't just place the blame on them and say, well, why aren't you upskilling yourself? It's like, you're not upskilling yourself because you don't understand how it works and you don't have the time to experiment with it and gain confidence with it. If we had those two things and that, you wouldn't give a teacher a knife and say, yeah, go and use that in your class on Monday. You'd look at the knife, wouldn't you, and think, well, actually, that looks dangerous. You'd study it a bit, wouldn't you, before you use it?
So how would we weed that in when we think schools are constantly, there's a problem, we'll put the onus on schools. And we've seen digital citizenship grow as an umbrella term covering a multitude of sins. In the same way as bias isn't brand new, we've been thinking of different ways, more about safety of a child. And we've been reminding children for a while about what they share, their data, their imagery, their footprint. And now we're adding on that sense of how do you check the authenticity of something? And then we have Kingsley saying we want to make sure that we're keeping our children safe and we're not using tools for peer-on-peer abuse. And of course, we've got AI tools providing beautifying apps and all sorts of other bits and pieces. So when schools kind of say we're really, really nervous about the bias and the broader implications of AI, how do you weave them together into one kind of cohesive, these are the areas to focus on, rather than just feeling like it's overwhelming and turn everything off, or, block all devices ever coming in their classroom? That'll fix the problem, won't it?
Yeah, well, that's an extreme, isn't it? I mean, I think you could probably visualize it, couldn't you, with the stages of AI adoption within leadership as a function of level of confidence with AI and technical background, perhaps, in that people might do that snap decision to buy time at which to try and upskill themselves and learn about it and the processes that could happen. But the important thing is that if they do buy that time, they then invest in upskilling themselves and awareness, and they don't just leave it and hope it goes away, because it's not going to go away. I get a lot of people saying to me, oh, you're really, I either get people telling me I'm anti-AI and having a go at me, or telling me I'm too pro-AI and having a go at me. I'm like, well, I understand the argument for not wanting to use AI and, keeping teaching human based and all of that. But realistically, it's a government priority. What a government priority is, it normally occurs in some, the money and weights and everything.
In the world,
Exactly. So the best thing that anyone can do is to try and not rely on anyone else, but to take the responsibility themselves as an individual teacher or a leader to become aware of the pros and the cons, rather than waiting for somebody to do it for them. And I think that is a hard bit, and I reckon we'll lose a lot of teachers because of that, because they're jaded, some of them, not all of them, but they haven't got time,
capacity.
the capacity, and also AI means that you have to know about yourself. Like, we do a lot in teacher training about teacher identity formation and everything like that. And I think established teachers, if they haven't spent that time and they've got into a bit of a rut, and not all teachers are like this, they don't want to spend the time learning about new cognitive science principles or aligning themselves to Rose and Shine or whatever the topic of the time is in education and
Do you think
pedagogy.
those are all defense mechanisms, though? And I don't mean that in an attack on the teaching profession, because we see it in every profession.
Definitely not.
That the natural fear is if you feel something is something that's outside of your comfort zone, and you're in a role where you've got no capacity other than your personal time to upskill your confidence, it's easier to dismiss than it is to embrace. Even if what most good folks are saying is the best way to protect young people with the use of AI is to train the adults, train the staff to know when it is or isn't appropriate and be confident when they say don't need it, thank you, but also it might be handy here. Train the parents to be able to provide that broader sense of what are you doing and are you actually challenging it, and hang on, you've started giving it a gender and a name. I'm concerned about you anthropomorphizing this chatbot, those kind of things. It kind of feels like often we think the strategies we've got to educate the children, which we do, but haven't we got to start with the adults in the building first?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a huge believer, and sometimes people don't like this, but I'm obviously a huge believer in digital literacy and citizenship and everything like that. But I also think, from my point of view, if I'm screaming at my daughter, don't shout at me, she's not going to learn to not shout because I'm shouting. So, that's a very crude way of showing what we model and what we scaffold is more important than the actual content, perhaps, that we're talking about at the time. So if our digital literacy and our use of AI is poor and non-critical, and we're blindly accepting outputs and having no criticality, then no matter what it says in the curriculum, no matter what resources or lesson plans or whatever you follow, they are going to see, right, the adult with responsibility, the role model I have here behaves in this way. So that's my ceiling for what I should expect. And so but the implications of that is yet more responsibility and pressure on the teacher. And I'm very worried about the pressure and responsibility that's placed on the teachers, because I do believe the teaching profession could cope with AI and could learn to use AI critically and responsibly and be confident, but they require time. And that's when it becomes a policy issue. It's a requirement almost, pretty much. It's not written as so, but it will be, to use AI, yet no time or resource is given to enable that to schools or leaders.
I just remember, while you talk about Victoria, I remember as a teacher, I think it was the strategies that followed the national numeracy, national literacy strategies. And every teacher was given a 5-day training course for each one to the proper full-on commitment. And that's what this needs now. AI
it is, exactly.
It needs 5 days minimum out of the classroom, proper training. But no school can afford that for all the staff already.
Definitely not. No, not on top of all of the SEND reforms, which are obviously integrated, but it's just, there's no capacity. And so it's the Wild West, so to speak, isn't it?
So I was going to say, I'm always kind of conscious that these conversations often come back to what individuals are doing in their professional lives. So one of the reasons why it was lovely to share and hear from you, Victoria, is you put work into books to kind of help educate the educators, to give people confidence a little bit more about how the strategies to help mitigate bias and how to use it. Can you share a bit? I know it's unfortunately requires the individual to give up their time in their personal lives to develop their confidence, but also hopefully remove some of those fears. But I'm just thinking, for those listening, it's a good opportunity to share what the book's about and how that might fit into their own personal development.
Yeah, I mean, ideally, you are right, Matt, that this shouldn't be required for people to use their own personal time. And this all goes into the whole workload debate, doesn't it? Does AI, does it improve workload? Well, if you want rubbish, non-representative lesson plans and resources, then yes, it will reduce your workload. But at the same time, you're also supposed to be properly personalising and adapting. It's one of these things where you've got to invest up front to get back in the long run, both in terms of workload and quality and representation for your specific context. So Yeah, so what I've been trying to do is to put together specific use cases, because there's just so much. I mean, there's literally endless ways, right, isn't there, of AI being integrated into education and learning. So I'm trying to think for use cases that teachers might have or students might have, and then how bias might creep up, and then demonstrate that, and then how you can work with that and mitigate against that. And a lot of that mindset purely comes down to putting your AI output on trial. Like, this is my new approach now. Treat it like a criminal. So it's guilty until it's proven innocent. And I think if you can have that mindset, and I'm using this with kids at the moment as well, how do you know that is correct? You don't know that's correct. It's just a guess, so you treat it like it's CSI drama or something like that. You prove to me that this is right, and then I might believe it. But otherwise, I'm just going to assume it's any random person's guess.
Can we say CSI AI? Is that the theme we're going to have?
Good one. Yeah, I like it.
I'm going to share a little snippet from us chatting now, and we'll have that as the tag.
CSI AI. I'm just conscious. We're in the 6th year of this decade, if I've got the year right. It's Saturday morning, 20. But actually, AI became sort of mainstream around early 2023. So if we took that as the start of the AI decade, 3 years in, the pace of change is just, I can't keep up. I know experts that say they can't keep up. It's ridiculous. What happens if we get this decade wrong, this AI decade wrong? What's the implications moving forward?
Up until January this year, I was really very worried about the whole of teaching becoming AI based. Since the announcement bet that we will keep the human beating heart of teaching there, that gave me some reassurance. I'm not going to lie, the whole Barnsley AI tutor project, of which we know very little, that's rolling out this summer, worries me, because I will be watching that very closely, because what happens with that, I think, will dictate the role that AI tutors, which I believe is the biggest threat, especially with agentic AI, in teaching and in education. My worry is that unmitigated and uncritical use of AI will I'm just calling it the great big normalizer. It's just going to normalize everybody. So, if you continually take extremes of opinions and ideas and you push them towards the center of ideas and thoughts, you're losing creative thought. You're losing divergent thoughts. Everything's converging to this statistical norm. So compounded over time, like in 10 years' time, you're going to lose basically what it is to be human. You're going to lose the random quirks and messiness that is a human, and you're going to be pushed down this statistical norms. I think a lot about this. My worry is that will happen. Also, my other worry is that if we rely on AI tutors, we're going to end up losing the shared curriculum, because this whole, I have an issue about this personalisation at scale thing. I'm not against personalisation. Actually, my PhD work was on personalisation, using art to personalise. And I do think we need to personalise things for children, but we have to ask ourselves, to what point? If we personalise too far, we lose a shared curriculum. Like if I learn how a light bulb and current works through unicorns dancing, and you learn through race cars, which is what ChatGPT will do, and then we both go on to become physicists working on a NASA probe or something, we don't have a shared vocabulary or conceptual base anymore, because yours has been very technical and mathematical, and mine's been done through story narratives about unicorns. We can't work together. We've lost a shared curriculum. We're in two separate personalised bubbles. So I really see the major role of the teacher being in that curriculum anchor. I do believe we're going to end up on AI tutors, especially for maths and more objective disciplines. But I do believe that the role of the teacher will be in taking personalised learners and re-anchoring them back, because that's what assessment can do. And that's what a teacher can do. It can bring people back. And it gets back to the whole idea of the importance of social learning, Vygotsky and Dewey and people. I think changes the whole concept of what education is. It's no longer about transmission. Well, I'll give it, it's never about transmission of knowledge, but it changes your role. You're a pathway manager. You're an anchor, but you're not the disseminator of knowledge. You're not a facilitator in the same way that we would have been, say, in the national strategies times, or even, 5-10 years ago. That's me not touching on any of the broader issues of kind of as being run by AI overlords. I'm not going down that route. I read too much science fiction.
Thank you. Right.
No, I love that. I love that. It's a really, I mean, we've done quite a few projects together. I could sit and listen to you for ages because I really do find that the way that you just analyze and put the things that we're thinking about, but in the practical examples, even if it involves unicorns and race cars, but the ultimate element of that is about, the personalisation. On one hand, there's a really, really strong pressure around accessibility and equity in the way that we engage in the education system. And the biggest bias for me is the curriculum itself, in truth. But you are absolutely right. If we all take it to the nth degree, we'll all end up speaking a different language that we've learned between ourselves and our digital companion. Now, that's not likely to happen, but I think that sense of how do we find a middle ground? It is a really, really difficult one we're grappling with. Now, there again, we live on a planet where we speak 150 different languages, and we manage to get on, and we do things very differently in many of our curriculums, and we still manage to arrive. But the maths, literacy, oracy, there's a common standard of stuff that probably OECD is responsible for that keeps us all in tune to a degree. I'm conscious of our time on our episode, and I knew yours was going to be a slightly fuller one because there's so many bits to cover.
I'm a talker.
Well,
it's fascinating.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you, Matt. I think the fascinating is the bit which is there is so much to this, but I would argue the biggest takeaway from listening to you, looking at your books, listening to your events, is about how do we build confidence that this is something that we can take control back over. Agency, as you'd say, and I'm never a fan of the word agency, simply because outside of education, nobody knows what you really mean.
Yeah.
But diplomatically, but in practice, exactly that. How do we do it? So what would be your kind of lasting points you'd want to say to folks who are really grappling and worried about this, about how they could perhaps self-check, how they could adopt CSI AI? I remember you sharing with me, for example, once I heard you saying about after you've done something, always do an extra prompt of iterative of what steps did you take to mitigate bias in your output. That's kind of a very simplistic way. But are there any other things that you would recommend to folks just to give them that first sense of back in control with this?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, what assumptions have you made here? And then the latest one I've done is what assumptions have you made, or how have you taken my agency away here, or how have you impacted my agency here? I think that's a really important one, especially with agentic AI. Other things you can do is just to iterate, keep asking questions, keep prodding and probing your output. The more questions you can ask, I think I wrote to Gemini yesterday, are you sure about that? It's just silly little things like that. And then see how it tries to justify itself, because they're very good at justifying themselves now, the reasoning models. And they'll do a lot of the work for you there in terms of finding their bias and their assumptions. But you've got to continue to be the human in the loop. And I think being a human in the loop is thrown around a lot. I think we need to think about being the teacher in the loop, because there is a difference, obviously commonalities, but there is a difference because of the responsibility that you've got to model to students as well. Being the teacher in the loop is a process, and it's dynamic, and it's not going to happen all at once. And people think if they just do these few prompts, that's it, I'll be confident and my AI use will be responsible. It's not that. I can make prompt books full of prompt books. They're a good scaffold to start off with, but they won't cover every use case scenario in every child in education. So what you've got to do is give yourself time to develop your confidence. Ask it questions, be more questioning of AI, be more demanding in what you want out of it, and teach it about your context. you tell it, you don't just say, oh, change the reading age, adapt this for a lower reading age. You say, adapt this for a reading age of X, Y, and Z with the assumption of, and then you talk about the learners that you've got that you want to adapt it for, obviously not confidential information. So you be specific with exactly what you want, because it's based on, if you visualize it as clouds of words and associations between them, which is what it is, it's going to pick from the most popular one unless you tell it otherwise. And if you tell it otherwise, it will do good stuff. It can be very helpful. But if you don't...
The more you put in, the more you get out, isn't it?
Yeah, it's that whole concept, isn't it? So it's be kind to yourself, because I find teachers aren't kind to themselves. And I think quite often some of the best teachers, if that's even a concept, are the most reflective teachers, and they're the ones that can be hardest on themselves for not immediately getting something. And if you don't have time or resource to immediately get something, that's a negative mindset. And we have to be very conscious of retention and recruitment within this profession, because that is one of the biggest issues. So how can we use AI to positively impact recruitment and retention within the teaching profession? Has anybody asked that? I don't see that question posted around anywhere. Get, backpedaling, how can teachers use this?
Unspoken, isn't it?
Help me. It's unspoken, but, wouldn't it be good if we repositioned everything? We have this tool. How can we use this tool to positively impact human teachers into the profession? Other than just this workload debatable issue.
Well, this is the rationalising that you reference there, because, at a high level, governments are saying, be careful. We don't want technology and AI to compromise what we're doing in the classrooms. And at the same time, are saying, I know you're under real pressure when it comes to staff workload and money, but you don't need to worry anymore, because you should use these tools to help mitigate those things magically. And there is we can't have both. And someone needs to be the one that provides the, there's a little bit of being frameworked to death at the moment in AI. And I think it's well-intentioned, but there's an awful lot, isn't there? And I think sometimes it's a case of, dare I say it, within education, everyone's working to a common aim. It's okay. We're not losing our own independent agency to say, here's the recommended way that you follow and utilize the tool within the English schools landscape or beyond, that says, well, at least we've got a foundation. And there is a little bit of training, but it's never the why. It's always the what you can do and how you can do it, without really connecting the dots as to why we need to do this and how we might kind of measure whether we're doing it well or not. So, but most things here come back to...
Well, I mean, that's the issue, right? Also, it's accountability. We've got these conflicting ideas that come out in the policy that you should use it. It's good for workload. It's good for personalisation. But also, we don't really know. I mean, it actually says it in it. I've got the phrase. We don't have evidence or research as to the impact of this on young children. So there's direct tension and conflict from the very document itself, let alone in practice. And then we don't have an accountability measure either on top of that. Ofsted is just kind of, well, we'll look at AI under the guise of governance. Well, what does that mean operationally? How do you define that and spec that out? Because their AI literacy isn't very high, because they have training needs. So, you can't say use AI critically and responsibly if you're not then going to offer training and show you what good and use and a responsible, accountable use looks like. And I totally get what you're saying about frameworks. I mean, I hate frameworks because frameworks are static. Teaching is dynamic. But if we look at this in terms of physics, all you would ever be doing is be taking a very small time interval and saying, right, I've got a framework for that, I've got a framework for that, I've got a framework for that. That's why strategy is more important, because it's dynamic. We need adaptable things rather than static frameworks that quickly date. That's my view. Yeah.
So wrapping things up, two things. Firstly, a shout out because you are on the advisory board of the Institute of AI Education, helping steer the journey, research and support, and a very, very important member of that advisory board you are. And in addition, you are doing lots to support schools and system leaders yourself through your own work. Can you just share where people can find you, get in touch with you, and the kinds of things you can offer?
Yeah. So I'm a specialist consultant. I focus on, my consultancy is all about bias and critical adoption of AI. So I do bias awareness training. and what that practically means, and also at a strategic level. I've got a website, which I'm very pleased with my website that I've coded with Lovable. That's genedlabs.ai, or you can find me obviously on LinkedIn. I'm trying to get into Instagram, but some of us aren't the nano influencers of like the wonderful Al Kingsley with these various badges. So I'm trying to throw stuff out there for educators as well. But yeah, I do talks, I do guides, and my paid work is working with schools and leaders on digital strategy and specific inset training, and sometimes guidance as well. I also work with teacher trainers. I've got a nice thing coming up with NASBIT next week to look at AI in teacher training, which is a completely other beast.
So plenty, but more importantly, thank you for joining us on a Saturday morning.
Thank you. This is a very interesting Saturday conversation, I have to say.
Most of our conversations
Saturday morning.
Yeah.
We are very blessed that we get to talk with lots of fab folks, and obviously we also get to collaborate quite regularly on the Institute work as well. So thank you again for your support on all levels. And
thank you.
Folks, if you're listening, do reach out, connect with Victoria, have a look at her lovable website. A very cool website it is. And also check out the books, which I think is really helpful. They're not the panacea to everything, but they're a great stepping stone to give you the next level of kind of thinking around how to move and give yourself confidence around using tools.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you. And I am going to play our jingle, because most people listening, that's what they're here for, as our little outro jingle as well.
I'm going to dance again to it.